Salutations and a good morning. I would like to thank everyone for joining us today for this lovely discussion. I am Azima Nadia, a New Straits Times columnist with 10 years of experience in journalism as your moderator for this forum discussion today. We certainly have a treat for all as we have invited special guests from different professions to join us today. First is signed up the agro farmer, Mr. Akil.
Hello, nice to meet you all, and thank you for inviting me to this forum.
Thank you, Mr. Akil. Next, we have the lovely Miss Kelly, who is the Director of the Department of Agriculture in the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security.
Hi, I am Kelly. Thank you for having me here. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. Now, a special guest, Professor Brenda, who is an international economist and a professor from the Department of Economics at Harvard University. Welcome, Professor.
Good day, I am Professor Brenda. Thank you for having me here today.
Last but not least, we have Mr. Sofwan, the Undersecretary from the International Cooperation and Development of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
A pleasant day, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to be here.
I hope that all the panelists are doing well. Now that we have met all our panelists, let's dive into the discussion. Today, we will be discussing whether food exports should continue despite the effects of climate change. I'm sure everyone is on the edge of their seats and can't wait to start this discussion. Before that, allow me to provide a brief overview of the topic at hand. In my opinion, the question of whether food exports should continue despite the effects of climate change is quite debatable, as there are several factors to consider. There is the perspective of the quality of food production, and there is the importance of food exports to our world. In one perspective, climate change is causing food productions to suffer. Water scarcity, droughts, floods, higher temperatures, soil salinity, and greater carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere affect staple crops around the world. The causes of these problems are fairly consistent, but the solutions are not. Not to mention the food prices skyrocketing due to the due to the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. The conflict has derailed Ukraine's ability to plant, harvest, and export its major crops, driving higher costs and stoking fears of the global food shortages. Hence, in a way, we need to slow down our food exports and focus on finding solutions to help our world escape from hunger. On the other hand, if we slow down our food exports, what will happen to our economy? Some countries can't produce all their food needs, so food exports need to continue in order to combat food insecurity in different countries. If climate change were to worsen, there will be a growing number of countries that will ban or restrict exports of wheat and other commodities in a misguided attempt to put a lid on soaring domestic prices. These restrictions will help ensure food supply for a country, but it will affect the nation, especially the poor, due to the prices of essential items being hiked up. This puts a dent in people's well-being as they are at risk of malnutrition. To conclude, we can actually look at food exports as a game of dominoes. When food exports drop, everything else crumbles with it. So in this forum, we will deep dive into the world of agriculture and economics to answer our question at hand. Now, Mr. Akil, you as an agro-farmer who manages the production of food supply sources, do you agree or disagree to continue exporting food during climate change?
Thank you, Nadia. Sincerely, I disagree if we want to continue exporting food during climate change. That is because, as agro farmers, our company will be responsible for delivering the crops to export the crop. First, we should know that during climate change, there may be floods or very heavy storms. So, crops and foods cannot be exported because the weather will block the path to export the crops. In addition, most of our crops that want to be exported in large quantities, such as grain, will be transported by sea. Thus, when there is a heavy storm, the sea level will rise, and the sea water will become too dangerous for the cargo to sail. We don't want to take the risk because it's not only dangerous to export the food and crops during a heavy storm, but it also can threaten the lives of our workers. That's why I disagree with exporting food during climate change.
A wonderful point provided by Mr. Akil. Professor Brenda, after hearing Akil's point of view, what is your opinion on the matter at hand?
Thank you, Miss Nadia. I think that Mr. Akil did a great job explaining his point of view, but I have a different opinion that differs from his opinion. And unlike Mr. Akil, I actually agree with the topic today because food exports have a big impact on the country's economies, and by having food trading all over around the world, we can avoid economic crisis and improve the economic recovery, especially for countries that are currently experiences economic crisis, just like Malaysia. So this, I think, we all know that food exports is one of the major source of income, and when we inhibit food exports, it will have a negative effect on the economy, such as the inflation of food prices worldwide and a decline in economic growth. By stopping food exports, it can significantly decrease the food supplies and then induce a food crisis all around the world. And I believe that climate change is sure to affect the quality of the crop yields, just like Ms. Akil said, but I believe it is more important for us to put nutritious food on the market by doing international trading and to ensure that there will be no worse food crisis will be caused. And as I said before, the restrictions of food exports may cause a slower or declining economic growth as one of the major source of income has been stopped. So countries have to depend on their domestic food production, which may be insufficient for them to preserve their food industry. And did you know that economic hardships and high food prices are the second leading cause of affecting 49 millions in 10 least developed countries as stated by the United Nations reports? So if a worse food crisis were to happen, poor people, including children, will be at risk to be undernourished, and the world hunger is already increasing in countries. So this can cause the government to for millions or maybe even billions, like it will affect the economy more.
Thank you, Brenda. Now, Mr. Sofwan, any thoughts to share on the matter?
But of course, it is within my belief that while climate change and its subsequent effects are a serious concern to consider, it does not merit the imposition of trade sanctions. My fellow panelists have addressed several stakeholders, such as national food security and Brenda just now, the economy and of itself. So let's take a look at the standpoint from foreign affairs. The international food circulation lies on a delicate balance. Stopping the trade could lead to a tip in the equilibrium, causing both economic and diplomatic ramifications. We cannot see the food supply of one country as one separate, distinct entity. It is possible, but that would be detrimental to its food security, both in terms of availability and pricing. Viewing the food supply as one global chain, as one big food supply, is more beneficial, both economically and diplomatically. Not to mention, without international food trade, few nations could maintain an adequate standard of living, particularly those of smaller size. Now let's talk about oil. So why this sudden mention of oil? Why am I suddenly addressing oil? What part does it have to play when we're talking about food right now? Allow me to elaborate. Food, being an essential, may become the next oil in the event of its scarcity due to climate change. Scarcity leads to competition between countries and, as seen from history, may escalate into conflict. We currently do not have the military prowess to sufficiently enforce this restriction without facing the ramifications. Although the threat of resource wars over possession of oil reserves is often exaggerated, the sum of total political effects generated by the oil industry makes oil a leading cause of war. Between one quarter and one half of interstate wars since 1973 have been connected to one or more oil-related causal mechanisms. No other commodity, reminder here, is a commodity, not a necessity, has had such an impact on international security. The exact same situation may occur if the projected impacts of climate change is as severe as it was calculated. What we can see from here is that oil itself is not a necessity, it was a commodity. Despite being so, the conflict has risen to such a point that it causes millions of deaths. What would happen if food replaces that place? A necessity. What if people are unable to even fulfill their basic needs? That is even greater stakeholder. And this in the future may lead to conflict if we were not to tackle this problem well. And such, it would be better for us to not impose these trade sanctions. That's all for now.
Thank you, Mr. Sofang. What an insightful thought about the correlation between food and oil. Who knew? Now, Miss Kelly, anything to add on?
Thank you, Nadia. So, Brenda and Sofan have a great point of view, but I have a different point of view from both Brenda and Sofan, and I am more agree with Mr. Akil's opinions. So, according to a research that I found, says that occurrence of droughts and floods could reduce yields by up to 60%. So, looking back to what Mr. Akil has said just now, climate change will cause the level to rise. So, rises in sea level is quite likely to result in saltwater intrusions and higher salinity levels in agricultural land, which causes rice productions in particular areas to be hard to increase. So, another research which is Norwegian Institute of Bioeconomy research states that high level of salts in agriculture soil or irrigation water make it difficult for salt-sensitive rice plants and other crops to absorb water and necessary nutrients. And as a result, plants' growth is suppressed and crop yields significantly reduced. Thus, the efficiency of fruit productions is not enough to export to other countries. So that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Kelly. Mr. Akil, I do wonder, what will happen if we still want to export crops despite climate change? Is it possible for the farmers or companies to export crops during climate change?
Good question, Nadia. I believe that not only you are curious, but other people also want to know what will happen if we still want to export crops during climate change. The most important thing that we should know before we want to export crop is the quality of the crops. If we still want to export crops, we should consider the quality of the crops before we export them. During climate change, extreme weather will reduce the crop quality and low quality crops will not be exported. It is because climate change that leads to an increase in temperature will lower the quality of the crops. When the temperature increases, the carbon dioxide charge will also quickly increase, and the elevated carbon dioxide will reduce the protein and nitrogen in the crops. Then the crops will lose their quality. As I said before, the low quality crops will not be exported because they can ruin the image of the exporter, which is the company and our country. If other countries receive that low quality crops or food, they will not repeat the order for the crops to be imported again. This will reduce the opportunity to export crops abroad in the future. In addition, we also have an act, which is the Export Quality Control Inspection Act 1963, that requires us to maintain high quality standards of the crops if we want to export them. So the product that do not reach the standard quality level will not be exported. That is why I said if we still want to export crops, we also need to consider the quality of the crops during climate change.
Thank you, Mr. Akil. Now, according to what Kelly has said before, I have been researching myself, and according to the Food and Agriculture Organization, 80% of the causes behind an unpredictable harvest for cereal crops in areas like Africa comes down to climate variability. In other areas like Bangladesh and Vietnam, rising sea levels pose a different threat to food security. There, coastal farmlands are often flooded by saltwater, which kills off rice crops. With half of Vietnam's national rice production centered in the Mekong Delta, even a minor flood can have major implications. Let's go back to our discussion. Now, Miss Kelly, looking back to our country, Malaysia, do you think that Malaysia has enough food to be exported to other countries?
Thank you, Miss Nadia. I can say that our country, Malaysia, does not have enough food to be exported to other countries. Based on the statistics in 2020, Malaysia export $48.2 million, is around 205 million Malaysian ringgits, and import $620 million, around 2,643 million Malaysian ringgit in rice. So it is obvious, very obvious that Malaysia import rice more than export. So what caused this to be happen? So the first one is this is because of the climate change. Climate change has caused a decline in food productions. On South China Morning Post article by Samir Noshidi, said that Malaysia is seeing 10 to 15% drops in farmyard annually because of unpredictable weather. Therefore, our country need to produce more foods first before exporting to other countries. So this is to avoid Malaysia's citizens suffer from food shortage. So that's all for me.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. What an insightful thought. Now, Professor Brenda, what are the impacts on the economy if we were to inhibit food exports worldwide?
Thank you for asking, Ms. Nadia. So the impacts of on the economy if we were to inhibit food exports worldwide is food price inflation and an increase in unemployment rates. Now you may wonder why an increase in the unemployment rates. So allow me to elaborate my point. Countries that are putting bans on international food trading will experience worse food insecurity. With food stocks being low in supply and high in demand, it will cause a massive hike in food prices, and this will cause the food insecurity to worsen as countries are putting a ban on international food trading, just like I said before. Say, for instance, the price of wheat has increased 6% all over around the world as India has banned the wheat exports recently, and this increase might sound insignificant for you if India is the only country that is doing that, but India is not alone in this because many countries are doing the same, and it is not just wheat because most countries are also banning the exportations of grains, and even Malaysia is banning the exportations of chickens and eggs. So India is not alone, like I said, and as a result, workers will have a harder time to put food on the table, and this can cause a drastic decrease in productivity. Having food trade restrictions will only put the country into recessions where the country's economy's performance will decrease for an extended period amount of time, which causes higher unemployment rates and lower consumer spending. Thus, the unemployment rate will increase as the economic growth will drastically decrease. That is all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Brenda. Now, Mr. Sofwan, how do you think our food trade partners would react to the sanctions imposed on the food trade?
Thank you, Azima. So, the high value of trade also signifies that other countries have a significant chunk of their food supply coming from us. Cutting off that chunk leads to disrupting said country's food supply. So, let's take a look at our export. We are exporting food valued at RM 38.69 billion ringgit. That is a significant amount of food. Imagine a country loses that amount of food. What they will have to do is to compensate for the missing 38.69 billion worth of food. So they have to make countermeasures to counter the increase in food supply, to the increase in food prices and everything else. What this causes is the country that is affected by this won't have a favorable opinion of us, and that makes my job as a person who manages foreign affairs even harder. Something that I really do not wish to see. Another aspect is that diplomacy and foreign affairs is closely related to economy, as Brenda mentioned earlier, regarding as to how prices increase, how people will have less work. We're essentially disrupting another country's uh, workflow, disrupting another country's economy. And not in a positive way, may I add, this will cause them to have an even lower, even less favorable impression of us. And this causes them to be less likely to cooperate with us in the future. And yes, which is why I believe that trade should still go on. And I hope that answers the question.
It certainly did, Mr. Sofwan. While we're talking about food restrictions now, here's a very unique question I have to ask. Does the act of applying these restrictions have any moral implications?
Wow, that certainly is a unique question to ask a foreign affairs man. I'm no humanitarian, but in the aspects of ethicality, certain countries are unable to survive without the food trade. For years, countries already dealing with the impacts of climate change on agricultural systems have sought to minimize these risks by sourcing vital supplies abroad. Let's take a look at Somalia, drought-prone Somalia. They import 90% of their wheat from Ukraine and Russia. And since the war occurred, they've been struggling really hard about their food supply because their bread basket is essentially another country. This is like a projection of what is to occur if climate change was to happen. What would happen even worse if we were to not continue our food trade. The people there want to be able to even feed their bellies because they literally can't grow food and they can't source food from other countries. This is what would happen if we were to close trade. And I think that while it certainly is not our fault, it really bears a burden upon our conscience, really. And I hope that answers your question as well.
That certainly does, Mr. Sofan. Thank you so much. Now that we're talking about, since we're relating to climate change, we can definitely relate to certain diseases transmitted through food and water. Akil, would you please enlighten me on these diseases?
All right, Nadia. First of all, I also agree with Professor Brenda and Mr. Sofan that economy and food partner are very important for our country. But I'm very sorry, we still can't export food and crops during climate change. That is because climate change will affect the health of crops, which will make the crops is too dangerous to be eaten. To be more clear, I will give an example. When there is a flood, the flood water can bring pollutants maybe from roads or fields or toxins entering the crops. This will cause the crop to be contaminated with germs and bacteria. What is more worrying is the contaminated crops can cause a disease such as cholera and typhoid. This disease is caused by eating food that affected by pathogens called Vibrio cholera and Salmonella typhi. This disease can be spread by contaminated food and crops during the flood. That is the reason why we are not exporting food since climate change has caused a lot of crops and food to be contaminated.
Thank you, Mr. Akil. That is certainly an insightful thought on diseases. Now, Ms. Kelly, could you please provide me any solution to overcome the food shortages and the decrease in food production due to the effect of climate change?
Okay, sure. So, in my opinions, we should focus on sustaining our country first before we start exporting our foods to other countries. It is an undeniable fact that climate change that happens around us has affected our food's quality and quantity. So, if we do not take any actions on it, most people around the world will suffer from the food shortage. So knowledge and education is a key to success. Farmers, if can citizens of all citizens of the countries should have the knowledge of the importance of crops and plants, technique of planting crops and others knowledge of the environments. So besides, they should be educated to the effects of the climate change to the crops. So according to Irene says that states on the research about natures and environments in 2017, efficiencies could be doubles or triples by providing basics means such as training, credits, land rights to the farmers and citizens. So therefore, skills and knowledge in producing high amounts and high quantities of foods are one of the effective way to overcome the food shortage. So we all know that climate change can be solved immediately, right? So climate smart agricultural systems will be important for necessary adaptations, which is to develop new food varieties, implementations of crop rotation systems, and soil salinity management for better adaptations to the change in the climate. So these systems has been successfully increased the food productions in China. So in China, this system has boosted productions of rice by 12% and maize by 9%. So besides of that, more than 29,000 farmers cooperative has reported higher incomes. So thus, rather than export our crops to other countries, we need to increase the food production first. So that's we have enough food to eat and also being exported to other countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. I couldn't agree more. According to an article I found, solutions should be tailored to the country's circumstances, with a focus on low-cost, high-impact measures, such as investing in new crop varieties, improving water management, and information dissemination. For example, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Rwanda are leveraging mobile technology to provide farmers with rainfall forecasts to optimize the planting of crops and the purchase of crop insurance. Now, Miss Brenda, Professor Brenda, the floor is yours if you wish to add on the matter.
Thank you, Ms. Nadia, for giving me the chance to speak again. So I believe Ms. Kelly has explained all the solutions very well, and the solutions are actually it's something that we can apply in our daily lives, like because the technology is advancing every day. So what she has suggested is very good, but I believe that we also need to think about the nation, because those who are born with a golden spoon and rich might not be affected at all. But let us think about those who are not blessed by great wealth. They will be the one affected the most by the food price inflation, like I said before, the rise. And we all know that food accounts for half of the family's budget. So instead of restricting food exports, I believe that world leaders should think of a way to step up the agricultural production and become less reliant on other countries. So if we can increase the food production, I believe that food exports should also be continued. That is all. That's all.
All right, thank you so much, Professor Brenda. Now, according to a research I have found, everyone is squeezed by food price inflations, but the poor hit the hardest, especially in developing countries, where food accounts for half of the typical family's budget. Now, Mr. Sofwan, after hearing all the opinions from the other panelists, what can we gain from continuing the exports in a world where food production has tumbled down significantly?
Thank you, Nadia. Previously, I believe both Kelly and Akil mentioned the impacts of climate change. But allow me to remind everyone here that while everyone in the entire world is impacted, the effects does not occur equally to everyone. Not everyone is equally impacted. Countries that have 4 seasons, which have limited time to farm crops, are the most impacted by the change. We, luckily, are the ones that are less affected by climate change, thanks to our tropical climate. Though we curse the hot days and the cats and dogs constantly pouring down the sky, we still have to thank it for giving our crops ample time to grow. So in the event of climate change, our advantage as a tropical country which can produce food year-round will prove to be advantageous, as we can use the food trade as a leverage. What this does is it fosters international cooperation. So we've heard just now that Kelly doing an amazing job by explaining of how we can adapt and overcome. And there are plenty more advancements around the world, but all of them occur in different countries, does it not? So how could we compile all of these technologies? How could we get the other countries to share their advancements for our mutual benefit? So how exactly? Why, through diplomacy, of course. And in order for to get them to share, say, technology, we need to bring something to the table so that they can gain something from it as well. So what we have is our food trade, which can prove to be beneficial. It can help us to gain their advancements, can prove to be mutually beneficial so that everyone in the world can benefit from the advancements, so that everyone can adapt to this change as well. And I hope that answers the question. That is all.
It certainly has, Mr. Sofwan. I believe everyone has provided quite an insightful thought on the topic and their professional perspective. I believe that all the points provided were valid, and it provided us a new horizon of knowledge on agriculture, economics, as well as diplomacy. Based on what Akil and Kelly have said, the effects of climate change has truly put us through a loop, and food productions as well as quality of crops has suffered. Action should be taken in order to sustain our crop production and once again restore our food security for the world. Based on the economics aspect, Brenda has provided us with the idea that food exports is a significant source of income. By inhibiting food exports, it will have a big impact on the country's economy, such as the increase of food prices worldwide. Stopping food exports can significantly decrease the food supply and induce a food crisis worldwide. We can also conclude through Mr. Sofwan's insights that food trade is important for maintaining and forming diplomatic relationships. Without international trade, few nations could maintain an adequate standard of living, particularly those of smaller size. However, I believe all the views are just as important in order to combat the underlying issue of food insecurity, and we mustn't sit on our laurels. We need to find solutions to improve our agriculture, as said by Akil and Kelly, to aid in the stability of economy, as mentioned by Professor Brenda, and therefore maintain our international relations, as mentioned by Mr. Sofwan. Unfortunately, time is not on our side and we have to wrap up this forum discussion. It was quite a discussion talking about whether food exports should be continued despite the effects of climate change. I would like to express my gratitude to all the panelists who are joining us today and to the wonderful people joining this discussion. Before we say our goodbyes, allow me to quote my favorite author, Charles Dickens. The pain of parting is nothing to the joy of meeting again. With that, thank you once again and hope to meet again soon.